Thank you. So, let me say first that I'm happy to be here again, like last year. I must admit that I didn't understand what you said before, so because I don't know Russian. But let me say that I'm very happy to be again here and start this Perm Winter School. So, my lecture will be about networks, and and I thought it may be interesting just to frame the concept of networks as evolved during the last 20 years. We will see that the study of networks is a truly interdisciplinary study. So I think I will convince you that this concept of networks that you have, for example, in the logo of the school, it's something that it has been investigated, and it is investigated in several disciplines. And there are signs that they could be useful, and they are useful in the modeling of financial and economic system. This is just a slide remembering a famous experiment that was done during the last century, in 1967, by a sociologist, Stanley Milgram. And at that time, I mean, things were pretty different from what they are now. And he wanted to measure how far each of us is from other people, and how you can explore the information that you have in your social connections, just to see whether you can find some far located information just by moving through a network of contacts. And the scientific question was, is it possible to deliver a message to someone? He selected a stock dealer in Boston, starting from randomly extracted people in Nebraska or Kansas. So here there is Boston, and here the idea was, I mean, we start from something very remote and try to connect with someone that probably has no direct connection with people selected here. So this was the setting of the experiment. It lasted more than 2 years, approximately 3 years. The idea was selecting people in Omaha, Nebraska, in Wichita, Kansas, and the ending point was in Boston. So he sent some envelopes to the original people, and he asked just to think in terms of reaching someone that was not known, very far from them. But if they didn't know, which was the most probably outcome, the idea was, try to imagine someone that could know the target. And and if you think that, please send the envelope to them. And in this way, the idea was to follow this chain of reaching the guy, which was supposed to be the target. And this was done for a certain number of people. This was done by mail at that time. And at each step, there was the possibility to send a postcard to the University of Stanley Milgram, which was Harvard. And in this way, it was possible to track the way the way people could have reached the target, starting from arbitrarily selected people, by thinking in terms of someone that could have known the guy and moving in this direction. And for example, this is the outcome of one experiment. This guy didn't know the target, but he thought that some relative or some people that he knew might have been in relation with the target, and then the other guy did the same, and so on and so forth, until indeed someone was really knowing the target. And this occurred in other cases. And Stanley Milgram, which is reported here in the picture, he measured the number of intermediaries needed to reach the target person. And I mean, you see the total chain were 44 at that time, so 3 years of experiment just to get 44 records. And what was the conclusion? The conclusion was that on average, it is the original randomly selected person reached the target in roughly 6 degrees of separation. And perhaps you know, I mean, this 6 degree, which is now internationally famous, this idea that you can connect anyone, we would say, in the world with anyone else through a chain of contacts that on average is in terms of 6 or even less steps nowadays. So this was an experiment done in sociology, and with this conclusion, which is quite stable and over time and also over different cultures and also in the presence of different technological solutions. But this type of study were done not only to detect the the structure of social networks, something that today is of that are extremely important, but also to understand some historical outcomes. Here there is another famous study by 2 sociologists, Paget and Ansel, that in 1993 studied the rise of the Medici family in Florence during at the beginning of the 15th century. This was done by considering a lot of relationship between the oligarchy families in the Florence of the 15th century. In particular, they started the marriage relationship, the partnership, the economic relationship, the trade relationship, and also the links in the real estate. And they built what sociologists called a multiplex, just to have a view of the type of relationship that were involving the different family, to explain or to see whether, I mean, what was to investigate what was the specialty of the Medici. And you can see already from this picture that certainly they were central. And in fact, in networks, you have what are called the centrality measures, typically, in any type of modeling of networks. And the Medici were centrals with respect to several types of activities. And from this perspective, this was one possible explanation. So they had a kind of social capital, in the sense that they were playing a central role. But this was not the only specialties. They also had other specialties, because other families had similar centrality, like Peruzzi or Guasconi. But in the end, they did not succeed, and Medici succeeded. So the sociologists tried to understand the network relationship of these oligarch families, and try to develop quantitative indicators for explaining the success or the defeat of some of the actors which are part of the network. We will go back to this a bit later. And another discipline which has been investigating, and it is investigating networks, is of course mathematics. And mathematics has provided a series of results in the modeling of network. And one of the most classic result is a result obtained by two Hungarian mathematicians, Paul Erdős and Rényi, during the years from 1959 to 1961. Specifically, this is the paper they wrote in 1960. They asked themselves how a random graph would be, what shape a random graph will take. So the idea was to have a certain number of elements. These are called vertices or nodes, and also they imagined that these elements were linked by some edges, and then they imagined that this number was fixed, and they consider all the set of all possible graphs formed by just randomly linking nodes. It's a typical approach of a mathematician, so it is looking for some general results, and indeed quite surprisingly, they found a very interesting results. Because you could imagine that this type of problems is just, you just imagine to put some random connection among elements. What kind of special things would you expect? In the end, we will see that there is something which is a real special thing, and this is related to the question of, to one of the questions that they posed themselves and they solved. What is the probability that the graph obtained by having small n nodes connected by capital N edges being completely connected? What is the meaning of this mathematical term? And we will see in a moment. So, but why we in a sense, we devote this type of attention to networks? I think the answer is, and this is started essentially during the last decade of the last century, during 1990s. We devoted this attention, in my opinion, because nowadays we have the network. The network is internet. The way of the World Wide Web. This has changed our life in a so dramatic way, and the society, that of course, a lot of attention need to be devoted to this huge technological achievement. And here, I'm just remembering that the World Wide Web, what was called and what sometimes is called Internet or the network or the World Wide Web, is something really huge. For example, by making a very generic search on the network. I'm using here Google, but probably you use something different in Russia. But if you do a search with a very generic word, and this is one of the most basic English word, the article and of course you find it in a lot of web pages. Typically Google got, let's say a few days ago, 25 billions of web pages, which means something huge, which was originated by this guy here. I think you know him. It's Tim Berners-Lee, which invented in 1990 essentially the web at the CERN in Geneva, and it is now a CERN. Okay, so the web is something, it's a network, it's an information network, what is called an information network. So it has a specific characteristic of a network, and it is something which is continuously changing. It started as an information network and then evolved on something where you can perform economic transaction or social interaction, and and you can also build a social relationship, which means that it is something which is extremely dynamic and flexible. And in fact, Tim Berners-Lee and collaborators have proposed to consider it as a living object that should be indeed itself an object of scientific study. And in fact, there is the term which is used of web science, and there is also, I mean, there are already scientific journals which are considered web science. I'm citing this just because, I mean, this basic large network is so important that only, I mean, its existence would motivate a lot of investigation in the direction. This is in fact what happened in the last 15 years. As I said, it is something dynamical. It is changing quickly, and one of the major changes after year 2000 have been the setting and the diffusion of social networks. And here there is some statistics from different type of social networks which are involving billions of people all around the world. Okay, so networks are around us, and they are investigated by several disciplines, and I cited social sciences, sociology, I cited mathematics, but starting from the 90s, also other disciplines started to investigate networks. Certainly computer science, just to deal with the networks, characterize networks and describe it. Also physicists started to investigate it, and in particular statistical physics, and between and social science, within social sciences, economics and finance started to investigate networks, and also biology and physiology. And indeed, here there is another discipline which is missing from this list, that has investigated a lot networks during the 90s of the last century, and this is management. And management, I mean, there are a lot of studies concerning the internal organization of a company, of a large or medium company, in which the interconnection of the different people which are part of the organization are described in terms of networks. And there are also studies, always in management, considering the networks that arise among or between organizations when they collaborate and or when they compete. So to this list we should also add the management. So let's now set some common language to deal with network. So what is a network? I have used this term a lot of time already, but we need to define a little bit. And here I'm using a very general definition of network, something that you can find in a dictionary. This is taken from the Oxford English Dictionary. So a network is a collection of interconnected things. So the idea is that you have something that you interconnect in some way. When you want to move from, let's say, a natural language to a specialized language, you need to be more precise, typically. So you need to use to set some definitions. And for example, in mathematics, it is preferred to use graph, the term graph instead of network. And in the practice, it has evolved the convention that you use a network when you want to describe something which has let's say a physical counterpart. You have the network of routers of internet. So you have the interconnected things are routers. The things that interconnect these things are cables, and then you have a network of the network of internet. You represent this network of routers in terms of a graph where you have nodes and links. And here I'm just reporting a simple description of the variety of network that you can see or that you can use to model things. This is just a network with one single type of nodes described by this symbol here, and one single type of edge or a link. So we have just one type of node and one type of relationship. In this case here you see that the nodes can have different characteristics. I mean, it could be that we consider, for example, this could be the network of mobile phone subscribers of a mobile phone company, and so the nodes are under this respect the same. I mean, the selected actors, economic actors are subscribers of a mobile phone company, and the link could be observed when you have a phone call from one subscriber to another. And I mean, this would be this type of network here, because you can associate a direction, because this guy, it is calling this other guy. So in general it would be directed. But if you do not consider the direction, this would be the network. And but perhaps, and in this case, we have specified the type of node and the type of event that is setting the presence of an edge. We can imagine to, let's say, characterize the diversity of the different subscribers. For example, we could characterize them by gender, or by age, or by location, geographical location, and then putting some attributes to each node. And doing that, we will have something where the nodes are no more identical, but are characterized by different attributes. And the links could be describing different type of calls. For example, calls within a city, or calls done at a very long distance, or calls described by different durations. And this will require what are called the use of what are called weighted networks. A network where the link between nodes has associated a certain value. And then these connections can be weighted, the one with respect to the other. So they are called weighted network. So we have different possibilities, and there are different tools to characterize this and to describe this type of networks. But the most basic characteristic is to have nodes or vertices and edges. So typically, if you want to write down in a mathematical form what is a network or a graph, you have a set of vertices linked by edges. The terms used change a little, also due to the fact that we have a lot of different disciplines which are describing the same problem: computer scientists, physicists, mathematicians, social sciences. And this implies that sub-community or each specific discipline is sometimes preferring one type of names or other type of names. So sometimes there are pairs of names or just a slightly different way of describing the same thing. Vertices or node, edges or links. And in mathematics, the number of vertices is called the order of the graph, and the number of edges is called the size of the graph. And, oops, there's some change of the symbols. Sorry for this. Typically, when you investigate a network, the networks could be really large, and you need to sample the network, which means just to select a part of the network. This is often the case when you have just part of the information, or when your network is so huge that it is essentially impossible to track the entire network, or very difficult, like in the case of the World Wide Web. So typically, you sample part of the network, and this is done in different way. One way is what is called induced subgraph, which means that you select a certain subset. This should be subset of vertices from the entire set of vertices, and then you consider only the edges that are connecting the selected vertices, the pre-specified set of vertices. So, this is just to cite that in some cases, due to the lack of information or due to the size of the system, you are forced to sample part of the network. We have already seen that the relationship that you have between two nodes can be directed. In some cases they are not directed. If you have in most cases a friendship between two nodes, this is not directed. But if you consider the previous example of mobile phone subscriber, which are setting their relationship in terms of calls, you have the caller and the receiver, which means that you have a directionality in the event. This is reflected in the networks by considering directed graph. And in the directed graph, you have directed edges, and these are called arcs. And this directed graph, this directed relationship can be, if we have two nodes, we can have the presence of the relationship in both directions. And when this is occurring, we will say that the link here is reciprocated. So, for example, subscriber U is calling V, and subscriber V is later calling back U. In this case, we have the presence of both directed links interconnecting the pair of subscribers. And the most basic indicator of a network is the quantity that is called the degree of the vertices. And essentially the degree is just the number of incident edges on the vertex. You see in this example here that the nodes are labeled with a number. So this is the identity of the node. This is node 60, this is node 79, and this is node 15. And to each node we can associate the number of incident edges. 60 has degree 1 because there is just one edge which is incident on 60. 79 has degree 2, and 15 as degree 6. And by reporting all this information, we can construct what is called the degree sequence, which is the description of the interconnection of the network. This could be in a directed graph. This needs to be specified in terms of in degree and out degree. At the end of the lecture, we will see the example of the international trade network. And in the international trade network, we will have export and imports. So it will be relevant just to evaluate the amount of import and the amount of export for each country. And this will be described in terms of in degree, or better if we consider weighted networks, what is called the in strength, and out degree or out strength when we put the weights. And you see, for example, in this, if you focus on the example I'm presenting, node 15 has a very high value of the in degree, and in fact it has the maximum value of the in degree in the in degree sequence, but has the minimum value of the out degree, because there is no arc outgoing from node 15. So let's go back to the problem that Erdos and Reini said at the beginning. They focused on the possibility of observing a connected network. What is a connected graph or a connected network? The idea is the network is connected if every vertex is reachable from every other one. So you see here a connected graph. We can select any vertex, and we can, and if we select any other vertex, we can see or we can detect what is called a walk, which is just connecting the two. We will have also a shortest path in general. We can consider the shortest walk, but we can have in general walks which are connecting the two vertices. And so we can have a network of this type, which means that we can imagine to go from one node to any other node. For example, we can consider as a network the network of airports, where the airports are the nodes and the links are the flights which are flying from one airport to another. I mean, if the network is connected at the airport, this means that we could reach any airport by starting from any other airport. But if the network is not fully connected, this means that it would be impossible to move by flight from one region to another region. And in fact, it is not granted that all the networks are connected. In general, you can have a network in which you have several different components. And typically, when you have several different components, you can detect the largest one. And in fact, the largest one is in a sense a special one, because it's the largest, and it is called the largest connected component, which in this example is this subnetwork here that contains the largest number of nodes. Up to now, I have not, in this example, I have used an undirected network, but we could have a directed network in general. And when we have direct network, how to specify the concept of the connection? indeed there are two ways. One way is to define what is called the weakly connected component, and the weakly connected component is defined just in this way. The idea is to consider the underlying undirected graph. So we have a directed graph, but we do not consider the direction of the links. And once we consider the undirected graph, we see whether the undirected graph is connected or not. If it is connected, then we conclude that the direct graph is weakly connected. If it is not even weakly connected. But when will we conclude that the directed network is strongly connected? It is strongly connected when every vertex V is reachable by every other vertex U through a directed walk. So we require not only that it is connected, but also that any path, that the path, that it exists at least one path from any vertex U to any other vertex V, which is a direct walk. So this requirement is much stronger than this, and this is the reason why this is called strongly connected component. Okay, we can imagine to consider or devise a lot of what are called matrix of the different networks, and one of the most basic matrix is what is called the distance. We have already used intuitively the concept of distance when I described the Milgram experiment. In the case of the Milgram experiment, the distance was just the number of nodes that were present in the path that originated from the starting participant and ended into the target one. So this means that typically in a graph you can imagine a distance between two vertices as the length of the shortest path between the two vertices. So in this example, in this example, the distance between node 60 and node 76 is 7, because we can find the shortest path, indeed two shortest paths, which have just 7 steps. The one which start from 60 to 79 to 29 to 19 to 44, and then or to 75 or to 70 or to 75 or to 77, and then to 20 and to 76. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. If we consider the shortest path for all the possible pairs and we make an average, we obtain the average path length, that in this case is just 3. So this information could be useful, for example, in evaluating the efficiency of a given network in terms, for example, of the network of the airports. Because by knowing the average path length, we can have an average indication of the number of steps that you need to take from moving from any airport to any other one in the world, for example. And up to now, I have not discussed in detail the role of the weight, but in general, we can have we have a weighted graph, because the weight could be important. It could be that this relationship is much stronger than the other one, and then this is characterizing the specific network. And all this definition in the case of weighted graph can be generalized. And for example, the distance is defined as the weighted length of the shortest path, and the centrality of a network is described in terms of what is called the strength of the vertex, which is the sum of all the weights of the incident edges. So the strength is the parallel concept, is the concept which is parallel to the concept of the degree. So now let's move to the shape of the different network. What kind of network we see in the networks that we observe in the society and in the nature, in socio-technical system. I mean, there are some very special networks, and these special networks are, for example, complete graph, when all the nodes are interconnected with all the others. So these are called, when we observe this type of graph, these are called complete, because you have all the edges that are possible. We observe all the edges that are possible. And when you see some structure of this inside a more complex network, you see that these nodes have a very special interconnection among them, and this is called from the social science community. It was called from the social science community a clique. So when you have a completely interconnected nodes, these form typically a clique. Another extreme, peculiar network is the regular graph, where all the nodes have the same degree. So this is a kind of lattice. So in quantitative science we call this lattices. And in some cases the networks have a tree structure, so they do not present loops. And when this is the case, when there are no cycles, a connected graph is called a tree. So this is a tree because it is connected and there are no cycles. When we have this joint union of trees, these are called a forest with some fantasy. So from tree to forest. And when a tree is directed, it is called a directed tree. And directed tree may show a root, which means, I mean, when you have a root, this means that all the other, when a root is present, you have a unique vertex from where all the other can be reached through a directed path. So the others are called, for example, parent or children or leaf, the last one, but from the root you observe that you can reach any other element with a directed graph, with a directed path. These are called directed tree. You have other type of networks, and another broad class of networks are bipartite graph. In bipartite graph, a bipartite graph is a graph where you have two sets of vertices, and edges are present only between a pair of vertices which are of different nature. For example, here you see I labeled the two sets with two different symbols. On the left, triangles, on the right, circles, and links are present, or edges, only between triangles and circles. There are no edges between triangles and no edges between circles. So these type of networks are pretty common because often you have things which are in relation the one with the other. Classic examples in network science are, for example, actors and movies. So you have a movie which has involved two stars, Another movie, these two stars here, or two characters, two actors. This movie here a bit more, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on and so forth. You can have genes and organism. You have a certain set of organism, and this organism has a certain number, or just a given set of genes. Or you can have a student and courses, because student can attend a certain number of courses. And you can have mobile phone callers and mobile phone receivers, and or banks and firms. So these are really typical graphs that you observe, bipartite graph. And this bipartite graph concerning what is called the topology of the network, which is the general shape of the network, have been investigated in terms of what are called the projected graph. So instead of, or in parallel to the analysis of the bipartite networks, sometimes just to see the structure of the interconnection, a projection is done, and the projection is such that you start from the bipartite, and then you obtain a network of set A nodes or set B nodes in a way which is obtained starting from the information present in the bipartite graph. You see here that node 1 and node 2 both have a link with node 7, which means that they are in relation. For example, these two actors did this movie together. So they had a common experience. And then in the projected network there is a link. And for node 3 had this relationship with 1 through the movie of node A, and also with other node 4 and node 5 through the participation to movie 9. And in this way you can construct the projected graph of set A, and similarly the projected graph of set B. The information which is present in the projected graph is not equivalent to what is present in the bipartite graph, which means that what you obtain by analyzing this projected network is just part of the information which is present in the original network. And here there is just an example concerning movies and actors. It is today relatively easy to find a lot of information over internet, and for example there is a very large database which is the International Movie Database. Here you can have information about a lot of movies. For example, we investigated during the period 1990-2008 the movies that were stored in this database, which were a few years ago ordered 90,000 movies realized in 158 countries with 400,000 different actors. So typically these are pretty large networks, and in this large network, from this large network, you see what? You can extract, let's say, some what are called ego networks, some very special large node in which you see a very high degree, some node that has associated very high centrality, very high degree. And for example, a few years ago, this was the case of Kevin Bacon, because Kevin Bacon was performing during that period order 700 different movies. So he was just performing in a lot of movies, and this put him at a certain centrality. But of course, I mean, he's not a so special actor. He just worked a lot. So the point is that when you look at this property here of centrality, sometimes this could be just a manifestation of the heterogeneity of the system. In this plot here, I'm just showing in a log-log plot, so in a logarithmic plot, the probability density function of the number of actors per movie. So there are number of actors per movie. There are films or movies where there are just a few actors, so these are cortos, and then there are movies that when you have 100 of actors, because I mean these are very large production, or because these are very special films where you put together different type of actors. Both things can happen. But typically you have an entire class of heterogeneity, both in the number of actors that you see in movies and in the number of movies played by different actors. So this is a typical property of what we call complex networks. In complex networks, you observe heterogeneity. And this heterogeneity is reflected on a non-trivial structure of the topology of the network. Here I'm just for fun, I'm just reporting a very small cluster of the large projected network of US movie. Because, I mean, if we plot this information here of 90,000 movies just in a picture, this will be just a blob without any readability of the network. And in fact, one of the areas of network science is also network visualization, because often you need to visualize or to have tools to visualize networks. Okay, there are other spatial networks. One class of this spatial network is the class of planar graphs. A graph is planar if we can embed the graph on a surface, especially on a specific surface, like a plane or a sphere, without the intersection of the edges. For example, this graph here, indeed is planar. Of course, by eye, you will not be able to resolve whether the graph is planar or not. I mean, I'm putting here the planar version, the planar representation of the same graph. So these two are the same graph. On the left, just draw with a standard network graph program, and on the right, done by taking care or not showing the crossing between the different edges. And in fact, I mean, if you try to evaluate whether a graph is planar or not, this is not an easy task in terms of computer science. This is a task which is called a non-polynomial task. Indeed, I mean, the complexity grows grows rapidly with the size of the system, and then you need to, and in fact, it is hard to test the planarity of the network when the graph is significantly large. But for graph up to, let's say, 1,000 nodes, you have numerical tools that will provide you whether a graph is planar or not. Why it may be important to detect the planarity of a graph? I mean, there is a technical aspect. A technical aspect is that if the graph is planar, you can, in some cases, associate it to the graph a backbone, which is what is called the minimum spanning tree. But another reason for considering planar graph is that in some cases you have a geographical constraint, like in the case of the graph associated to the navigation points of the airspace. I don't know if you are familiar with this, but when you fly, your flight has a route, and this route is through a series of points which are fixed geographically. And these points are called navigation points, which means that by construction, this type of network, the network of navigation points, is a planar graph. So, and then this is something that originates in some socio-technical system. How do you describe a network? You describe a network in terms of the adjacency matrix, and the adjacency matrix is just a binary matrix where you put 1 when you associate a link between element 1 and element 2. So element 1 has a link with element 2, 3, and 5. And you see in this row, element 1 has a link with element 2, 3, and 5, which means that the sum of this row of this matrix 3 is just the degree of the node. And this is one way to put the information about an indirect network in terms of a matrix, which is called the adjacency matrix. This can be done also for directed networks. And in the case of the direct network, the matrix will be not symmetric. And by considering the sum of the row and the sum of the column, we can obtain information about the in degree and the out degree of the different nodes. Mathematicians have discovered a lot of important properties of the adjacency matrix. For example, the R power of an adjacency matrix is providing the number of walks of length R between vertices I and J. And so by performing just a computation of the power of a matrix, we can sort out and obtain information concerning the number of walks which are connecting vertices I and J. The information concerning a graph, which is typically written in an adjacency matrix, sometimes is preferred to be written in terms of an edge list. Why? Because if we want to use the formalism of the adjacency matrix, that may be useful, for example, to detect the number of walks or length R quite easily, we need a memory of the order of the number of vertices to the square. And for very large networks, this could be quite demanding. Whereas if we store the information concerning the graph in terms of an edge list, where the edge list is just reporting all the edges which are present, and the edges are direct edges, saying that 1, 2 means that there is an edge, a direct edge between starting from node 1 and reaching node 2, which is this one here. Then what you need is just a memory of the order of the number of vertices plus the number of edges. So for sparse network, this could be much less than that. So, and from a computer point of view, it could be more convenient to use this one here. Up to now, I have discussed with you just the concept of degree centrality, but indeed there are also other measures of centrality. One of these is vertex betweenness, and this is just obtained by considering. Sorry for this, because by changing computer, it is this is just the sum of S, which is not T and not V. So the idea is that we are interested in the betweenness centrality of this node here, and we consider all the shortest path for all the pair of starting node and target node. And then we divided, we consider this ratio and sum this ratio, where this quantity is the number of path which are shortest path which are passing through the specific node, in the case selected A, and the other are just all the shortest path between node S and T. So the idea is this node important to connect the majority of nodes or not? So are the paths the shortest paths which are passing through A, a large fraction of all the shortest paths connecting the pairs of nodes or not? This is the quantity which is providing this type of information. That could be also related just to the edge and not to the node, and this is called edge betweenness. And the reason for that was that indeed in the study of social sciences concerning, for example, the rise of Medici, they saw that indeed, as I said at the beginning of the lecture, Medici were not only central just to their interconnection, direct interconnection, but they were extremely relevant in terms of betweenness, in terms of connecting the different families of the oligarchs of that period of Florence. In fact, in terms of marriage relations and in terms of economic tie, Medici had the highest value of central betweenness, 0.36, with respect to the second one, 0.18, almost 2 times in this in terms of marriage relations, and more than 2 times in terms of economic ties. So they were central not only by direct relationship, but also in terms of interconnection of the different protagonists of the networks. There are other metrics that are used in the modeling of networks. One is local clustering coefficient. So this is something that it is related to the number of edges observed between the nearest neighbors. So the idea is that do we see something clustered locally, or we see something with a star shape when we focus on a specific node? The specific node is blue here. So because this is a local clustering coefficient. So when I select this node, also the nearest neighbors are interconnected or they are not interconnected. So this quantity measures this property. This can be generalized in terms of a global clustering coefficient, and this is just 3 times the total number of triangles divided by the total number of connected triples. Okay, let's now go again to the Erdos-Shreni. So in the case of the Erdos-Shreni, the idea is we have a certain number of nodes, and we put with some probability, in an alternative, we put with some probability and a link between a pair of nodes. by controlling what is called the average degree. This is the quantity of the average degree. And when we do that, what's happening concerning, and this was the first question of Erdos-Sciarreni, what's happening concerning the largest connected component? And you see here in this very small graph that typically the largest connected component fluctuate when the average degree around the small value, and then increases when the average degree increases. Of course, this is nothing, seems to be nothing special in a small network, but when we try to enlarge the network with 40, something more evident emerge. When the average degree is less than 1, the size of the largest connected component remain limited, around 8, no more than 8. But when the average degree is larger than 1, then this largest connected component increases at a size which could be even 50% of the total number of vertices. In this case, the largest connected component is 22. You see, it's this part here. So, of course, I mean, if we just do this type of analysis, we could repeat this a lot of time with a computer, and you can do this quite easily. There are a lot of packages doing that. It could be difficult to visualize it, but the beauty of mathematics is that sometimes you can have an analytical solution for that. And this is what Erdos-Sciarreni did. And what they observed was that when the mean degree is changing, then this largest connected component, which is considered, which is called the giant component, the largest that you observe by increasing the average degree, it is something that occurs abruptly in infinite system. So it is always small, 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 small until the average degree is 1, and then start to grow. To grow until what? Until 100% when the degree is of the order of 5, the average degree, but already for an average degree of 1.5, you see, it's something of the order of 40%, 45, or even 50%, which is what we saw in a small system of 40 in just one realization. So this is just to say that even random networks provide surprise. So in a random network, there is a control parameter, what is called the control parameter. And you have physicists will say you have a phase transition. You have something which is of one type, ice, and then becomes water, or vice versa if you prefer. Water and becomes ice. It's like a phase transition. So it's something that occurs abruptly, and it is controlled by something in a precise way. This something is the mean degree. So the mean degree can control the nature and the topology of the system in a very basic network, just the random network. I have another 20 minutes. This motivated the fact that, you can have other surprise in terms of networks. And the other surprise came from another model, which was proposed in 1998. This model was, in a sense, stimulated by the Milgram experiment. And the idea was, it seems puzzling that we are 7 billion people, and our distance in terms of network between myself and anyone else in the world could be of the order of 6. So this is quite surprising. So it is, we know that our world is clustered in terms of social relationship, but on the other hand, it seems that you can reach very far communities just by moving a very limited number of steps. So how can this be possible? And one answer comes in terms of this model, which is called the small world. And what these two authors did, Duncan Watts and Steven Strogatz, in 1998, was just to move from the very special network that we have discussed, the regular network, the deregular network, to the other network that we have discussed, the random network. How to do that? You can start from a regular, and you can imagine that you select randomly one of these links, and then the term is called rewire. You just disconnect one on local link and put the link with one just random, with another random. If you repeat this a lot of time, you will end up into the random network. If you do just a few times, you remain very close to the regular network. The regular network is just describing a local interconnection. And the random network has no regularity except the emergence of the fact that you can have an entirely connected network when you have a degree which is sufficiently an average degree which is sufficiently high, larger than 1. And this was the case for this case. But what the authors noticed was that as a function of this probability of rewiring, if you compare the average clustering coefficient and the average path length, what you see is that indeed, as you expect when you move from regular to random, the average clustering coefficient will decrease. So, which means that you lose the local interconnection. And then you gain, and then you shorten the average path length. But the shortening of the average path length and the decrease of the average clustering coefficient are not occurring at the same value of the probability. So you have a very large interval of presence of this, we can call this weak ties, that where you observe a large average clustering coefficients and a low value of the average path length. So this is the condition when you observe a small world, because you will have a few paths which are connecting local structure which are the one far away from the other, but with halos that the system is showing an average path length which is much less than the one of the regular one. So this is another surprise. So you can have a structure of the average. You can have in several systems. You can have a clustering and small average path length. And this is something that you see in the World Wide Web, in internet, in the actor movie system, in co-authorship. This is what the author found. So the two things are not in contradictions. Through these weak ties, you can have low average path length and high average clustering coefficient. So you maintain the local structure and the possibility of interconnecting far subgraph which are living or which are just far the one from the other on average. Another surprise was concerning the fact that when you analyze the degree distribution of the World Wide Web or of the actors, you observe a huge heterogeneity. We already discussed this for the case of Kevin Bacon. So, and this heterogeneity is not just inequality, that there is a guy which is significantly different from the other. You have an entire class of different type of style of participating to the movie, in the case of the actors, or you have different types of World Wide Web pages. So you do not have a typical scale in the degree. And in fact, this type of distribution have been called scale-free distribution. And one model for this scale-free distribution is the Barabasi-Albert model, in which you have what is called the preferential attachment. So the idea is that if you imagine a growth of the network, this will occur through preferential attachment with the node which have already an high degree. And this implies, I'm sorry about that, and this implies that you can write down what is called the master equation, describe the dynamics of the probability density function of the degree d when you have n vertices. This can be written down, and by using the probability of adding a new vertex with new m edges and looking for stationary solution, the solution is that you must have a probability density function of the degree which is inversely proportional to the degree to the cube. So it is a power law degree distribution. So you have a power law degree distribution, and this power law degree distribution in a log-log scale here indicates the absence of a typical scale. This also implies that in this random growth, you will build up heterogeneity, and the heterogeneity will be related to the age of different nodes. I'm afraid I prepared too many transparencies, and then I would say I will skip this. Okay, and move to the other example, which is this one here. So let's consider an example primarily in economics, just to see how it works. What we saw was that, we have that networks or models of networks present quite unexpected properties. So they present the emergence of some phenomena. So you have a phase transition on network. You can see phase transition on network. You can see heterogeneity on networks, and you can see also quite counterintuitive effect on networks. You can have a short average path length, and also the presence of clustering. So can we use this to describe or to model an economic system or a financial system of great interest? And the answer is, of course, yes, because otherwise this topic would have not been selected for the school. So let's consider one investigation that has been done over the past year in the area that is called econophysics, and this has been and the topic of this investigation has been to model the international trade network. So in this network, nodes are countries, and edges are directed and weighted according to the amount in dollar of imported and exported goods. This is just a partial visualization of the original weighted network. And you see, this is just the largest 1% of the links for 2002. So, as I said before, if you try typically to describe these relatively large networks, when you plot these networks, these are just blobs. So you need to filter, and just to show, the most important links, these are the most important links for 2002. Today it would be different. You have China, you have USA, you have Russia here, Germany, and then, so probably it's even before than 2002, because it was Federal Republic of Germany, France, Italy, Mexico, Canada, and so on, Japan. So you have direct links. Here they are not reported as direct, but you have export and import. And then you have all these countries, and you analyze these countries, and you analyze the topology of this international trade network. Why the topology? Because the idea is, of course, the network is heterogeneous, because you have USA and you have Switzerland, for example. You have Russia and you have, I don't know, a very small country, Belgium here. So, the country could be quite different, and of course they could participate at a different level into this network. So, as usual, these networks are heterogeneous, but do we learn something from the investigation of this network? Let's see. So, this is just the cumulative distribution of the degree, in degree and out degree distribution. Indeed, in degree in blue, out degree in green, and the complete degree distribution in black. And you see that in a log-log plot, you have certainly heterogeneity. So probably this could be compatible with power law, so a scale-free distribution. With gamma, due to the fact that this is a cumulative gamma, the exponent should be, this is just to gamma plus 1, so gamma is 2.6, and this 2.6 is not too far from the 3 that you expected, that we expected in terms of the preferential attachment, this famous growth model of the preferential attachment. And here the preferential attachment could make sense, because there is this building of the globalization of the trade, and then there is a nucleus that start to exchange goods on a global scale, on a world scale, and then other countries start to participate by participating to the WTO, and then this network grows. So it could be a sort of preferential attachment, but we will see. That tomorrow, that sometimes discriminating between preferential attachment and other similar models could be not so easy. So what is certain is that we have heterogeneity. We have a huge heterogeneity, as usual. And then we can also, scholars are investigating also, for example, the local clustering coefficient. Remember, the clustering coefficient is measuring the type of interconnectedness around a specific node. So the point, when we select a node, and when this node, here this is done as a function of the degree, and when the node has a certain degree, what is the clustering coefficient of that country characterized by the specific degree? And you see that this is decreasing. The clustering coefficient is high for node with low degree and low for node of high degree. And associated to this, you have another measure which is called the average nearest neighbor degree, which is just a measure of, as the definition says, of the average degree of the nearest neighbors. So you have a node with a certain degree, you select the nearest neighbor, and then you estimate the average degree. This is also decreasing as a function of k. So this has been interpreted in terms of what are called disassortative networks. I don't know, in statistical physics, this term started to be used. It is not a universal term. Other disciplines are not using assortative and disassortative. They are using other terms like inbreeding homophily or this type of indicators. But here, this indicator is just trying to estimate whether, when you select a node, and you can typically the nearest neighbor node are also of high degree or of low degree. So when you have assortative networks, typically you observe that nodes which are linked maintain relationship. So very nodes with very high degree also connect with nodes with very high degree on average. And in the case of these associative networks, you see that when you have an high degree, the number of the average nearest neighbor degree is not so high. So you have a lot of these cases among your neighbors, much more than these cases here. So this is what is called a stylizer fact. You observe it in the, and this is the approach of statistical physics in the modeling of large networks. So we see a specific stylizer fact, we see this associativity, and this is pretty robust over the year. Is this telling us something concerning the underlying economic aspect? To do that, I mean, what you need to first estimate is whether this fact is consistent with the heterogeneity that you see or not. So in statistics, this is called as the need to have to compare your empirical observation with a null hypothesis, with a specific null hypothesis. The null hypothesis which is used, it is called in network science, it is called configuration model. The idea is just, I mean, let's imagine that the degree sequence of the system is fixed. So the heterogeneity is there. Why? Because the world is heterogeneous. I mean, we like or we don't like. Typically what we observe that when you have a complex system, you see heterogeneity. So this heterogeneity emerges, you have this heterogeneity there, but the point is, are we saying just the heterogeneity of the system or are we saying something more? To conclude about this question, we need to discriminate with respect to a null hypothesis, maintaining that degree of heterogeneity. This can be done by performing numerical replicas of the system, and this has been, I mean, this is done typically by performing what is called the rewiring procedure, originally proposed by Maslow and Sneppen in around 2003, 2004. The idea is to maintain the degree sequence, which means maintain the degree of B, D, A, and C, but randomly swap the links when this is feasible and when this is maintaining the same degree sequence, the same degree of each node. So this is done numerically. When this is done numerically for very large networks, this could be extremely time computer demanding. And then you can also devise an analytical approach. And fortunately, in this case, you can write down an analytical approach. Here it should be a sum on this quantity here, which is just an entropy. And this is just the probability of a set of graphs which are doing what? Which are maximizing or minimizing a certain quantity, which is in analogy with some physics models, is an energy or fitness associated to a given graph. So you can imagine that you select the graphs which are fulfilling some constraints. These constraints are the in degree and out degree of the network. And this in degree and out degree could be in terms of just connection, edges, which means it could be for unweighted graph, or it could be for weighted graph in terms of in strength and out strength. This could be done analytically, and these guys here, Squartini and Garlaschelli and Fagiolo, two of them are physicists and one is an economist. They did for the two cases of unweighted network that they call binary networks, and weighted network, where the weights was just the amount, the fractional amounts of the entire world trade. And what they discovered was that if they consider the unweighted network, indeed the random null hypothesis is providing a result which is not so far from real data. So, which means that the assortativity, this assortativity that is observed in the data is at least this assortativity is compatible with the degree sequence when you just consider unweighted network. But when you use a weighted network, this is no more the case. In the case of the weighted network, you see discrepancy between what the model says, the null model, and what the real data shows, which is indicating what? I mean, there could be two things. Or it could be that indeed the null model is not the most appropriate one in the case of weighted network. Also because in the case of weighted network, the solution is just controlling in an exact way the in strengths and out strengths, but not the in degree and the out degree. So, because this is, from a technical point of view, is not feasible. So, and or it could be that indeed, essentially, we have some preferential trading or indirect trading presence in the weighted international trade network, which is more evident when you consider weighted network. They did the work year by year from the 50 to 2000 by using a very detailed database, and the results which are presented here are just year by year. This is just the Pearson correlation coefficient between the observed, which is this blue line, and the red empirical observation. So you see, for example, here by eye that you have a very high correlation between the two, and this was for 2002, and 2002 it was essentially year after year, and which is a correlation of approximately 1, which means that the null hypothesis explained well starting from 65. So starting from 65, the network took the shape that the unweighted degree sequence was enough to explain the disassortativity of the network. For both, for all the 4 conditions concerning the in degree, out degree, in degree, and out degree. This is for unweighted network, whereas for weighted network, when they consider the average nearest neighbor strength with the 95 confidence bands, which means this quantity here, this was not described by the null hypothesis. So then there is information that you can extract, and this information is probably related to the indirect path of the international web trade. And I think I should stop here, right? Okay, thank you. Questions or?
Thank you very much. Actually, one question maybe for me to, maybe it will be useful. Would you suggest, I mean, you said visualization is important because the networks are too complex to visualize as, as it is. So would you suggest any methodologies or toolkits which are useful to start with to sort of get the best possible visualization of a complex network?
I mean, there are several tools available on the web concerning visualization. I mean, and these tools are some of these tools are originated in biology, other tools in social sciences, and other in mathematics, already showing that different disciplines are contributing. In general, there is no single answer to that. I mean, in a sense, it depends on what you want to put in emphasis in the description of your system. For very large network, sometimes this specific solution could be, it is typically tailored with respect to the system. So, I mean, you have a system, you have some, let's say, attributes that are characterizing your network, and then, for example, you associate a color to a specific attribute, and then in terms of this attribute, you might have some representation which is informative and showing that you observe, let's say, the presence of clustering across the different network, which are showing different area of the networks that are manifesting some specific property. So there is not a unique way. So I would say this is something that depends on the specific problem. There are general tools for that. Sometimes you can put in emphasis, for example, some metrics like the degree centrality or the betweenness in a given representation. And depending on what you are interested to, you select the one which you believe is more informative.
Okay, thanks.